Now, there is no denying, whether we like it or not, that banks and banking systems are an integral part of our lives all around the world, and of course, in particular, in the West, because how things are so integrated between financial systems and just the way that we access money, the way that we transact, the way that we pay bills, and all types of other normal conveniences, which are now done through internet banking systems specifically. Now, with that type of system, particularly a system which is going more and more cashless, we are entering into a time period where banks are exerting all types of control over our lives. And of course, couple that with the involvement of government, big tech, and all these types of censorship that we're seeing of people's views and political beliefs and religious beliefs and all types of other things. This is setting up for a recipe for disaster. Now, it's not uncommon to hear stories about debanking around the West, in particular in countries like the US. We're seeing examples of this. Recently, of course, we've seen examples of this happening in the UK with Nigel Farage, with him being refused service by a certain bank. And it was unclear at the start in particular why this was happening, but Nigel Farage has since coming to the possession of some documents which tends to show that this bank may have based their decision to not have him as a customer anymore because of his political views and beliefs. And some of these documents that he's in possession of now, as he alleges, shows this. But before I discuss this, I'm just going to go on to this BBC article, which actually explains a little bit of this. And also on this video, I'm going to look at some examples from Australia of similar things, not necessarily debanking per se, but just showing you how banks in Australia are now exercising more and more control in terms of how they interact with their customers, and why I think this is in particular a very dangerous precedent that banks are setting. And if there's no regulatory frameworks being set, or if there's no pushback from politicians particularly, and of course from customers themselves voicing that they are actually concerned about this and actually taking their money elsewhere, not everyone, not the average person does not have the luxury of not using the banking system. Now, people might make all sorts of, use cases for why this is a good scenario, for why crypto is good and so on. But let's be realistic here. The average everyday person, 99.9% of us, are using the normal regulatory banking system. Your employees are paying you through the banking system and so on. So that makes it a very integral part of your life. Now, let's have a look at what's happened to Nigel in the UK. Nigel Farage, Coutts documents show bank account shut over my view. Sorry, I might have butchered the name of that bank. Nigel Farage says he has evidence that Coutts Bank decided to close his account because his views do not align with their values. Writing in the Telegraph, he said he had gained access to a report by the bank's Wealth Reputational Risk Committee via a subject access request. The BBC previously reported that his account was being closed because he fell below the financial threshold. Coutts said decisions to close accounts included reputational consideration. In the Telegraph article, former UKIP leader Mr. Farage says that the 36-page document shows that he was targeted on personal and political grounds. Now, I'm not going to go over this entire document and this video that he's discussing in, but he's specifically saying that that document showed that, in the explosive 40-page memo, Brexit is mentioned 86 times, Russia 144 times, PEP 10 times. Support for Trump plus views on immigration, net zero, and the vaccine are listed as reasons to exit me. They say my account is commercially viable. So one of the previous arguments when this story first came up about Nigel Farage was the fact that the bank was saying because he wasn't meeting his obligations in terms of having a certain set number of, certain set amount of money in the account, it was no longer commercially viable. That's why they ended the relationship. Well, it turns out now that from these documents, it shows that they were very much so looking into his political leanings, his political beliefs, and this may be the reason, according to Nigel Farage at least, as to why his bank account was removed from their services. Now, my personal opinion is I do believe that these woke virtue signaling style corporations, these banks, would definitely engage in this type of political censorship. Again, that's my opinion. And based on this type of evidence that we're seeing, it's coming to fruition that this is becoming more and more the case across many countries, in particular in the West. Now, if you look at countries like China, where we know that a social credit system of a type definitely exists, we already know this type of thing is happening. If you're doing political wrong speak in China and these type of authoritarian countries that we often look down upon, these things are happening and we are aware of that. But what we have to be mindful of now is that in the West, it's increasingly becoming like this. We are becoming, starting to live in these nanny states, these parental type states where banks and other institutions where we require for our daily day-to-day existence in many ways are starting to really become nosy and telling us what to do and why they will not service us. This is where it's headed. Now, if we go back to how this all kind of came about, I'll just give you a bit of a background on that. Last month, Mr. Farage went public with the fact that his account was being shut and said he believed it was for political reasons. He later said he had been turned down by 9 other lenders. But people familiar with Coates' move subsequently told the BBC it was a commercial decision and that the criteria for holding an account with the bank are clear from the bank's website and so on. This is kind of what we went through before. But look, I think Nigel Farage is definitely being targeted, and it's unfortunate that this is kind of the world that we live in. But closer to home in Australia, another similar story was this one that came to light a couple of days ago. And this was, of course, Westpac customer reveals what happened after he made a modest cash deposit. Now, this was an individual, just a ordinary person like you and I, making a ordinary style deposit of a cash amount into his bank account. I think it was below about $10,000. And the bank had frozen his account after he made that deposit. So he was checked into a hotel. He went to use his credit card and he found out that it was declined because his account had been frozen. I'm going to read this story and then just cover what I think is concerning about this particular story with Westpac. Look how massive this ad is at news.com.au. Jesus. Let's try to close it. Wow. Just fake news. Look at that ad. A pro poker player has unleashed on Westpac and accused the major bank of engaging in despicable behavior after his account was blocked over a very modest cash deposit. Crispin Rivera, and also an Australian expert on US defense and politics, visited a smart ATM to deposit the lump sum after a successful poker session. Rivera made his deposit without any incident, but seconds later he received a message from the hotel saying that he'd attempted to charge his card, but it had been declined. I immediately tried to log into internet banking, but I was locked and said I had to call. I did so and was informed the fraud unit had locked it. Mr. Rivera took to Twitter describing his experience dealing with the bank as a sickening and totalitarian experience. The fraud team blocked my account at first. I assumed it was for my own protection. They demanded to know where the money came from. I told them it was lawful and none of their business. They refused to give names or put the request in writing, but said the account would not be unblocked until I adequately explained these funds. Mr. Rivera says it wasn't some huge sum triggering money laundering, insisting it was an everyday amount that could impact any ordinary person. This is sickening and outrageous. The bank has no business in people's private lives, says save that required by law. Legislation must be passed now to hold banks to account for this despicable behavior, he finished. He insisted the deposit was way less than $10,000, the amount which typically triggers security scrutiny and requires Australians to submit an official threshold transaction report. Now, of course, Australian banks are already very nanny state-like, and these regulations and so forth that they love to impose on us. But in this instance, it was an amount below that $10,000, just an ordinary deposit of cash, and the fraud squad at Westpac had blocked his account, had locked his account, and said they would not unlock it until he told them for what reason or how he came about with that money, or how that all transpired. What on earth is going on with these banks? Now, this is not exactly the same as what happened to Nigel Farage in the UK, but again, we're seeing these banks taking these steps to almost. It's like it's their money that people are putting into their account. It's not the customer's money anymore. The bank is technically almost holding you ransom until you explain to them exactly where that money came from. What business does a bank have knowing the everyday expenses and the way that people are consuming and spending their money, or where they're getting their money from for such small amounts. Even for large amounts, I think the banks should stay out of it, and they should these kind of things should be handled by law enforcement. If there's an issue or there's some suspicion of fraud or some sort of criminal activity occurring on a bank account, there's relevant authorities that can be, this can be given to for them to investigate. But we're seeing banks increasingly taking these proactive measures to stop fraud at the expense of the customer, and then putting the onus on the customer to divulge private information to them before they unlock their accounts. Ridiculous. And when this particular customer asked Westpac in writing to show me where it says I have to do this, and for you guys at the Fraud Squad to give us your names, they declined to do that. Now, since then, I've seen Westpac on Twitter reply to this particular individual and tell him to DM them, and they will look into it and escalate the matter further and come back with a response. But it goes to show you just how intrusive banks in Australia are becoming. What's next? We've spent, we've had too many carbon emissions in terms of our purchases, so they will lock our accounts. Ridiculous stuff. This is also a story from today or 2 days ago, 8 hours ago. Cash no longer available over the counter at some Commonwealth Bank branches in Sydney, Melbourne, and Brisbane. 3 major Australian cities are being affected. The specialist centres are located in Brisbane. Commonwealth Bank has created a very small number of specialist centres in major metropolitan areas, which are designed to support personal and business customers with more complex banking needs. The specialist centres provide customers with face-to-face access to specialist home loan and business lenders, and also offer the latest self-service technologies. The new centres offer general customer assistance and help with home loans, business loans, and saving goals. Customers can also process bank checks and international money transfers at the centre. Now, we've noticed over the last couple of years, more and more banks are shutting up shop. They're shutting up their operations around many different parts of the country, in particular in the major cities, and going online only, or in this instance, they're having these, customer-facing operations but no longer can you withdraw cash from them. It is all cashless. It is all online, which is, I think, how they would prefer it. And this is another story from a couple of days ago as well. And this maybe some people might agree that this is possibly a good step. This is to stop people from using their financial accounts, I think, it's called coercive control in perhaps a relationship, like an abusive relationship, where a partner might cut the limit on a credit card, for instance. So the banks are saying now that they're going to get involved in this as well and keep an eye out for this type of thing, and essentially shut people out of their bank accounts if they are engaging in this type of behavior. I believe the NAB and also Commonwealth Bank of Australia are going to be doing these type of measures going forward. So here, NAB, this is on their website, by the way, they say, in a bid to stamp out financial abuse, NAB has today announced an important update to its terms and conditions that will allow bankers to cut off customers who have been identified as committing financial abuse. The new reference to unacceptable account conduct officially puts customers on notice that the bank can suspend, cancel, or deny individual access to their savings and transaction accounts if the bank identifies them as engaging in financial abuse. Now, I'm not very clear, based on reading this particular news article from the NAB, under what methods or what legal framework they're using to assess whether someone is committing this type of abuse. Now, we know, usually these type of relationships where this type of thing can happen, often domestic violence style relationships, it's very complicated. Is a bank the adjudicator, best place adjudicator to actually say who is in the right or who is in the wrong, what is actually happening here? Will these type of systems be abused by people in relationships, and potentially the bank will make an incorrect decision and lock someone out of their account? And this is, of course, accounts where people get paid their wage into, their salary into. Now, you can see where I'm going with this. And even though in this instance, some people might argue the banks have a good intention, it is, again, up for abuse, right? This is the type of system that can be put in place, or type of reasons that can be used to deny people access to their own money, their own funds. This is all going in one direction. And the last story I have for you is, of course, banks push to explain why they shut out crypto customers. Now, this battle between cryptocurrencies, traditional banking systems, CBDCs, it's firing up all around the world, and you're seeing institutional players come into this space as well, and banks, obviously, and governments trying to regulate the crypto space. And one of the issues that we're finding is that companies engaged in this type of cryptocurrency banking, because they still need to use traditional banking as well in terms of moving funds around, particularly if they're companies which have traditional style normal customers as well. They're finding increasing obstacles with dealing with banks. And one particular issue is, of course, the debanking of cryptocurrency companies or startups and things like this. So let's have a read of this article. Treasury will work alongside the prudential and financial crimes regulators to force banks to explain why they shut down accounts of corporate customers in the crypto and fintech sectors in response to accusations of anti-competitive debanking by major banks. The moves to boost transparency come after the Council of Financial Regulators, CFR, made recommendations to Treasury in August following concerns from the digital currency startup sector, whose members told a Senate inquiry it was getting harder to access bank accounts. Banks and regulated payment companies are still clamping down on crypto groups. Now, I'm not going to read that entire article. You can look that up. It's on the Financial Review. So I've just shown you a mix of different articles, one from the UK of someone actually, politically being politically debanked, allegedly, according to the evidence that he is putting out there. An example from Australia of just a customer who is depositing their own cash into their account, and this Westpac fraud squad going, hey, tell us what you're doing. Where did you get this money? We need to know before we can unblock your account. And then we had an example of banks in general just shutting down their operations and no longer offering cash withdrawals. Then we have, of course, the banks and their attacks on cryptocurrency, this time in the corporate space. And you can see just in the banking sector itself, this industry, even if we take the government out of it, they are making moves and waves into people's lives that are uncomfortable for me. And I think for many of us watching at home, many of you watching at home, you would also find this uncomfortable. And I think the longer that we are silent about this, the longer that we continue to do business with these type of banks who are engaging in this behavior, the more and more that they're going to do this. And before we know it, we are in a system which is a social credit style system where our money is all coupled within these banks, coupled these little systems that they've put in place where they're judging character, where they're trying to see if you're a good partner or not at home. They're trying to see what type of activities that you are doing before they unblock your account. This is all becoming very problematic. And I don't know if cryptocurrencies is the answer to this. Some people say they are. You have to understand that governments are over-regulating this area as well, and they will go hard in this area. So what do you think? What are the solutions to this? Have you seen any other stories of people being debanked? Which banks in Australia in particular are the worst offenders in this space? And is there any politicians, is there any movement that you're seeing from people in leadership positions that are starting to tackle this issue? Or are they all just a part of this massive debacle and scam, in my opinion, that's going on? And they're all in on it, and we are just being left hung out to dry. Anyway, guys, if you're enjoying these segments, my shows, you can follow me on YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Odyssey, Rumble, and not Threads. I'm not posting on Threads that much at all anymore, if at all. At The Real Rukshan, or you can look me up as Rukshan Fernando. See you all next time.